again, everybody. Welcome to the Comstock channel. I'm Marlin Bowling, your host, and thanks for joining us here today. Well, we love talking with you about all things related to agriculture, and today is no different. I want to welcome aboard a good old friend, an old colleague of mine, John Jenkinson, and I used to work together at RFD TV for about, I believe, 4 years, John, if memory serves me correctly. John and I both happened to grow up in Kansas as farm kids, different ends of the state. I was in the north central part. John was in the southwest part. Anyway, John went back to Kansas. He is now an ag lender. He's also a farm manager. He's also a pilot. He farms himself. He's got all sorts of interests out there, and it's a pleasure to get a chance to catch up with him and see what conditions are in the Southern High Plains. I want to remind you to be sure and like this video. Be sure to subscribe to it, and if you want to share it with your friends and relatives to help them out, I appreciate that too. So let's go ahead and talk about conditions in the Southern Plains here, John. You have been dealing with a drought for, what's it been, about 4 years until it finally broke late last year. Give me an update on that, would you?
That's correct, Marlin, and it is very good to be with you and visit with you again. We went so many years. In fact, last year we didn't even have a wheat crop in this area, even though we started getting rains back in April. Part of that reason was because we just didn't have any rain to get that wheat established. Much of it died during the winter. Some of it didn't even come up, didn't even emerge because we didn't have enough moisture. So there really wasn't much of a wheat crop. But back in late April, about May, we started getting rains here in this area. And traditionally, we get about 16 inches of rain a year. Last year, just between April and May and the end of the year, we got over 22 inches of rainfall just in that short period of time. We had fantastic fall crops, and it did set us up for good emergence for this year's wheat crop that we would have been planting back in September. So we're in much better shape now than we have been. Pastures, those conditions are really improving a lot. And right now, when you look out there across a lot of these wheat fields, just looks like a green carpet. Now, I will say that it must have been about October, November, we started seeing some of those blue spots in the wheat, which you and I both know that means it's starting to hurt just a little bit. But we ended up getting rain. Most areas in southwest Kansas and even up in west central Kansas around Leota, Wichita County, Logan County, we ended up getting over 2 inches of rain before the wheat went into dormancy. That was enough to really put this wheat on its feet, so to speak, and we went into dormancy in very good shape. Then about 3 weeks ago, we had a very wet snow that just blanketed the entire area. The bad part was it was driven by 60 and 70 mile an hour wind, but it was a very, very wet snow. The temperature was hovering around 34, 35 degrees. And so all of the soil right now is just very, very wet. The fields are wet. Roads are muddy. This is a good problem to have compared to what we've had over the past 2 years. And this wheat really is going into spring in very good shape.
Now, there was some question there for a while that maybe temperatures got below zero there for a little while. Was that the case in your area? Is that still any kind of a threat that there could be some winterkill or not?
That's a good point, Marlin. And to answer that question, the word is yes. In northwest Kansas, temperatures dived all the way down to as much as 18 and 20 degrees below zero. But a lot of that wheat was in dormancy. It was healthy. The soil was wet. And that's one of the keys, is keeping the soil very wet around the root system of that wheat. And that helps kind of keep it insulated. And as long as the wheat is healthy, yeah, you will see a little bit of winterkill, but it's not going to be the extent that it was had it been dry. In the southwestern part of the state where we're at, we got down to 14 degrees below zero. Some of that wheat still had some snow cover on it from the blizzard that we had. So when we come out of dormancy here, yeah, we'll see a little bit of winterkill. You can see some of the tops of that wheat was actually burnt back just a little bit. But as you and I both know, wheat is like a weed. It's very, very resilient, and it certainly looks like we stand to have a pretty decent crop, barring any big complications between here and harvest. Of course, we've got a great canopy on this, It's going to be tillering up very, very well. So we don't have to worry about weed pressure this year like we have in the past where we've had very thin stands. Really, things look much, much better, except for the price at this point.
Well, yeah, that's very true. And of course, it was not only the wheat that was devastated by the 4 years of drought. I mean, it put a just a horrific dent into the cattle industry there. And you're in big cattle country there. Everybody's talking about the fact that it's still going to take at least a couple of years to raise enough cattle to rebuild the herd. It's like we just cannot get anywhere on that. So, what is the situation like where you are there, especially from the standpoint of the cow calf herds, uh, as you go maybe further north and west out there? Are they having any success rebuilding, or do you think we're still a long ways off?
It's a slow process, Marlin. We're still a ways off from rebuilding this cattle herd. Cattle just got to be so expensive. What had happened, and I'll explain this just a little bit if you'll allow me to give some of our viewers here a little bit of background. When we were in such a terrible drought, feed costs were just astronomical. There was no pasture to be had. It was just terribly expensive to keep these cattle. And in fact, many of the cattle producers in western Kansas faced the issue that eastern Colorado was the same way. We're just going to have to sell them. We cannot afford to keep these cattle. Feed prices are so high, we can't find pasture. There's nothing out there for them to eat. And so those cattle were all liquidated and sent to the packing house. Now here we are a year and a half later. We're still trying to build this cow herd. We will have pasture this year because yes, we've had moisture. We're starting to get on our feet there, but feed prices were still relatively high going back 5-6 months ago, and it's kind of slow to rebuild this cow herd. I've talked to a lot of cattle producers that say they'd love to go out and just buy all kinds of cattle and put them out on grass, put them out on milo stalks, maybe background, put them in feedlots. The problem is they're still very expensive cattle. And with the economy the way it is right now, and we're starting to see the consumer start to back away a little bit from the beef case because of those prices. A lot of the cattle producers I've talked to said, I'm just not willing to roll the dice on all of my equity just to try to rebuild. I'll maintain what I have so far. I'll go as far as feeling comfortable about rebuilding my herd, but I'm not going to get out in the passing lane and really step out and take a big risk at making this a big move. They're pretty cautious at this point.
Well, you and I both farmed in the 1980s when it was just a terrible time to be in the farming sector. The farm economy was so bad, and that's been my main concern here, John. As we went through the drought, I just wondered how many folks had to bail out of their operations. How many just couldn't hang on that long? I mean, this drug on for 4 years. And what's the economy like? How healthy is it out there?
The economy in this area, and you got to keep in mind that if you take Kansas and you divide it into four different areas, the southwest part of Kansas is probably a little bit more resilient, and much of that is because we have irrigation in this area. You go to the northwest quadrant where they've lost a lot of that aquifer, and they can't recover from this quite as well. So southwest Kansas, yeah, things were okay, but many of the producers I talk to and the people that come in here in the bank and we visit with, they don't want to get overextended, especially with interest rates taking the jump that they did. Input prices like fuel and fertilizer and labor and insurance, those big ticket items, they're much more conservative. What we have seen isn't so much the younger, maybe the new established farmer getting back or maybe stepping away and letting go and going to town to do another job. It's the older farmers, the farmers that are 65, 70, and 75 that were still involved with agriculture. They're the ones that have said either, hey, I'm going to rent this out to somebody else that wants to take on the stress and the risk, or they've sold their ground. In fact, we just saw a land sale here in Kearney County just day before yesterday, where it was a retired farmer that just decided to get out, sell his land, take that money and put it in the bank, put it on interest. And, in some banks like here, we can get north of 5% interest, and he's just going to live off the interest and his Social Security. rather than take the risk. And so that's kind of where we've seen things. Now, I will say this, many of our borrowers are much more frugal and really sharpening their pencils this time around when they've been coming in to talk about the operating notes going into 2024. I'll give you an example. I talked to one producer the other day. He says, "Yeah," he said, "the wheat looks good. I'm going to top dress, but I'm not going to throw all of the inputs at it that I normally would. Even though I'm top dressing, I may not put on quite as much fertilizer because I'm not going to see that kind of a return with the crop prices with wheat, going backward every day, day after day." So yeah, not a lot of guys have quote unquote gone under. They're hanging on. They're much more. When we had those good years, they were putting money back, paying off debt. The one thing we have seen is machinery dealers really starting to feel the pain because nobody's buying any new machinery. Their service areas are completely swamped, but the new sales certainly have dropped off.
Yeah, got to stretch that used equipment and get as much use out of it as you can. That's for sure. That's a good point. Glad you brought that up. Well, John, I wish we could talk a lot longer, but we'll try and catch up with you again somewhere down the road here, not too far into the distant future here. But it's always good to visit with you. Thanks for the update. That's John Jenkinson. He is a farmer slash ag lender slash manager in Southwest Kansas, around the Garden City area, around Lakin, and appreciate the update there. That'll do it for this episode. For producer Breanne Hendrickson, I'm Marlin Bowling. Catch you next time on the Comstock channel. Thanks for joining us on our Comstock YouTube channel. Don't forget you can also find us on Facebook and TikTok as well.